Chapter 1 opens with the protagonist reflecting that everything had unfolded exactly as she had intended. She had lived in a castle where luxury had no limits, bearing the title of crown princess of a vast empire that ruled over the entire continent. In her understanding, every aspect of the world existed for her sake. Everything belonged to her. That was how it was meant to be. Then everything changed when the crown prince called Karina Amandia Crocus forward and declared their engagement dissolved. He condemned her as a vile woman, accusing her of envying her sister's true love, trampling others beneath her feet, indulging excessively in luxury, and being ruled by selfish ambition. He pronounced that she would be sent to the northern lands, a region inhabited by beasts, so that she might cool her foolish mind there. Thus, in the year 490 of the royal era in Chloria, Karina Amandia Crocus, who had once been destined to become the wife of the first prince of the kingdom of Chloria, was instead exiled to the frozen wastelands of the north. Snow fell heavily upon Karina's castle in the northern lands. Inside, her maid approached and informed her that her meal had been prepared. Karina questioned whether the maid was referring to the pitiful scraps laid out for her. When she turned to face the maid, the girl appeared confused. Karina then stated that she had no appetite and ordered the meal to be taken away. In her thoughts, Karina observed how the trees had lost their leaves, now standing barren and desolate beneath a blanket of snow. The frigid land was so cold that it felt as though the air itself froze her fingertips. Everything was swallowed by an endless white, a cold pallor that seemed to smother even the faintest traces of light. She let out a quiet sigh and wondered how matters had come to this. She reflected on the kingdom of Chloria, a nation with vast territories stretching in every direction, east, west, south, and north, renowned as the most powerful and prosperous country on the continent. Several years earlier, she had been welcomed into the royal family as the fiancée of the first prince, Orlando. From that moment, she had devoted herself to embodying the dignity required of a future queen. She had cultivated a commanding presence befitting one who would wield authority. She had fostered relationships with royalty and nobility from foreign lands. She had pursued a beauty worthy of a queen's crown. Yet she could not forget the day the first prince abruptly chose to cast her aside. He had been foolishly swayed by sweet, flattering words. As Karina bit her nails in frustration, she thought of the woman she despised, the one responsible for it all. Karina remarked to her maid, Seal, that she must have drawn the short straw as well, having to remain by the side of a master like her in such a distant and desolate place. She wondered aloud if Seal had grown tired of it. Seal answered that her duty was to serve Lady Karina. Karina scoffed at what she considered stubbornness. Turning her gaze toward the window, she declared that she would unquestionably rise to the top once more. The one who had driven her into this exile was Orlando, and the one who had influenced him was her younger sister, Aurora. Karina swore that she would exact revenge upon them both. Seal attempted to soothe her agitation, but at that moment, a deep rumbling sound shook the surroundings, startling them. Snow continued to fall outside. Within the castle, Karina and Seal braced themselves as the walls and furniture groaned under the vibration. They waited several tense seconds until the rumbling finally subsided. After the tremor ended, Seal questioned what the sound had been. Karina reflected and recalled that the foolish prince had mentioned that the northern lands were a place where beasts dwelled. When Seal reacted with surprise at the mention of beasts, Karina elaborated that she had read about them in an old book. These creatures were described as terrifying beings that had existed unchanged since the age of legend. They possessed razor-sharp fangs and immense claws, and their grotesque forms were beyond belief. According to the tales, they attacked under the cover of night, tormenting their victims in the darkness before ruthlessly taking their lives. It was said that after the Great War, they had been driven out and confined to the northern lands. Karina questioned whether such stories could be true, though she concluded they were likely nothing more than fabrications meant to frighten children into sleeping early. Seal noticed Karina reaching for her coat and cried out in alarm, asking if she intended to go outside. Karina responded that she would investigate the source of the noise. She mentioned that she would take a sandwich with her first. If the sound had been caused by an avalanche and the damage reached the castle, the consequences could be severe. Seal insisted that she would accompany her, but Karina cut her off, questioning what use she would be and ordering her not to follow. She then shut the door firmly, leaving Seal behind. Outside, the snow continued to fall steadily as Karina made her way through the northern lands. She observed once more that it was nothing but a barren expanse. She wondered how she had been able to boast so confidently about revenge. All that remained at her side were a handful of servants and an endless stretch of land, white and empty as far as the eye could see. Karina gripped the trunk of a tree as she surveyed the devastation before her. It was a complete disaster. An avalanche had indeed swept through the area. She felt a measure of relief that it had not flowed in the direction of her castle. As she looked into the distance, she noticed a small figure lying in the snow. At first glance, it resembled a puppy, but upon closer inspection, it appeared to be a wolf. The snow crunched beneath her boots as she approached the sleeping creature. She reflected bitterly on her circumstances. First an avalanche struck her lands, and now she was faced with pests. Even if it was only a cub, she reasoned that she needed to deal with it before it caused any trouble. Karina drew her sword and aimed it at the shivering wolf. At that moment, a memory surfaced from her childhood. When she and Aurora were young, their parents had called them over. Their father had told Karina that her uncle had kindly brought them a present and instructed her to express her gratitude. The gift had been a white stuffed dog. Karina had been delighted, thanking her uncle enthusiastically and promising to take good care of it. She remembered how her mother had noticed Aurora watching her play with the toy, smiling quietly. Then her mother had asked Karina, as the older sister, whether she could allow Aurora to have it instead. Karina had hesitated, clutching the stuffed dog tightly to her chest. Her father had quickly intervened, offering her something else, a fine embroidery kit. He had explained that she was at the age to begin learning such skills. Her mother had agreed, and her father had added that since she would one day be married, it was more suitable for her. Karina had lowered her gaze and reluctantly accepted, handing the toy over to Aurora. Aurora had asked if she was truly certain before thanking her sincerely and promising to cherish it. Karina had watched as Aurora coughed again, recalling how their mother had warned that too much excitement would cause her to develop another fever. The memory faded, and Karina returned to the present. She thought to herself that, in truth, she too had wanted to cherish that toy. Slowly, she lowered her sword and knelt before the wolf. Taking out the sandwich she had brought, she offered it to the animal, encouraging it to eat. She took a small bite herself before placing it down. Cautiously, the wolf crept closer. The scent of the food immediately brightened its eyes, and as it began to eat, Karina silently expressed her gratitude to Seal for preparing it. After a short while, the wolf stopped eating and fixed its gaze on her. Karina questioned why it was staring at her face, wondering if something was on it. Suddenly, the wolf sprang up and dashed away. She called out instinctively and rose to follow the tracks it left in the snow. She muttered to herself about how abruptly it had departed, remarking on its heartlessness. Soon she stopped, groaned in frustration, and decided to abandon the chase. Instead, she resolved to see what the nearby town looked like. Without warning, an arrow shot past her face. Her eyes widened as she quickly turned and dropped low to the ground. She wondered who was attacking her. Before she could complete the thought, another arrow struck the snow near her. She reasoned that they must have mistaken her for a poacher and were targeting her because of it. Then, a darker suspicion formed in her mind. Were they aiming at her because they knew she was Karina Amandia Crocus? Another arrow flew and struck her in the chest. She fell to her knees, a grim realization settling in her thoughts. She concluded that these attackers were nothing more than pawns of the prince and her sister. Gathering her strength, she forced herself to run. It seemed that Exile alone had not satisfied them. They had gone so far as to send assassins to this remote wasteland. After running for several moments, her strength gave out. She collapsed face-first into the snow and rolled onto her back. Opening her eyes, she saw that a blizzard had begun to rage around her. She scoffed bitterly, thinking that even the weather stood against her. Her life truly was the worst. She was always the one who drew the short straw. As the snow swirled around her, she remembered the white stuffed dog she had given to Aurora. In her heart, she admitted that she, too, had wanted to treasure it. Suddenly, a long-haired figure appeared before Karina. She could only see the person's back. As she tried to focus and discern their face, her strength steadily drained away, and her vision was swallowed by darkness. After some time, Karina slowly regained consciousness. As she opened her eyes, the first thing she noticed was warmth, an unfamiliar sensation that made her wonder if she was imagining it. She rose from the bed and looked around, realizing she was in a room she did not recognize. Confusion filled her thoughts. She had been in the snowy mountains, so where was she now? Before she could make sense of it, a voice interrupted her thoughts, remarking that she was awake. In the next instant, Karina was suddenly pulled back into the bed, startling her. When she looked up, she saw a woman with the features of a wolf standing before her. The woman greeted her cheerfully, calling her a beloved princess. Karina was overwhelmed with shock and disbelief. Her thoughts raced as she tried to comprehend the situation. She glanced down at herself and realized she was unclothed, which only deepened her panic. The wolf woman commented that causing such a commotion immediately after waking up was proof that Karina was in good health. She explained that she had removed Karina's clothes out of necessity, otherwise, Karina would have frozen to death. She emphasized that nothing improper had been done and stated that she was not foolish enough to touch her betrothed before their wedding. Karina's confusion intensified. She fixated on the word, betrothed, questioning who this woman was and why she was being called a fiancé. She was certain she had never agreed to marry anyone. As her agitation subsided slightly, she noticed something unusual, animal ears, no, unmistakably wolf ears, atop the woman's head. The wolf woman observed Karina's realization and asked whether she had finally noticed. She reminded Karina of what had happened in the snowy mountains. When she herself had been starving, Karina had given her the prey she had been eating. Karina searched her memories and recalled feeding a sandwich to a small wolf she had encountered in the snow. A sense of disbelief washed over her as the implication became clear. The wolf woman, seeing the recognition in Karina's eyes, remarked that it seemed she had finally remembered her. Karina insisted that offering the food had not carried the meaning the wolf woman was implying. The wolf woman responded that even so, in the harsh conditions of the snowy mountains, giving one's own food to a starving animal, especially a wolf that could potentially pose a threat, was not something an ordinary person would do. Under normal circumstances, most people would eliminate a weakened but dangerous creature. She pointed out that Karina herself had initially raised her sword against her. She questioned why Karina had not simply killed her then. Karina averted her gaze and admitted that it was because she had remembered a certain little girl. The wolf woman smiled gently and reached out to caress Karina's face. She remarked that Karina possessed the ability to cherish and care for others, and that she truly had a beautiful heart. Karina was taken aback by such words being directed at her. The wolf woman then brushed her fingers against Karina's ear. Startled, Karina demanded to know what she was doing. In the next instant, the wolf woman leaned in and bit into her neck, piercing the skin and drawing blood that trickled down. Afterward, she declared that she was Rishutoka, daughter of the wolf tribe, and that she had just performed the tribe's traditional marriage rite. By this act, she vowed to become Karina's faithful partner. Karina was stunned by the declaration of partnership. Rishutoka then asked for Karina's name, addressing her affectionately as her beloved princess. Thus, in the year 491 of the royal era in Chloria, the noblewoman Karina Amandia Crocus, who had been exiled from the royal capital, unexpectedly encountered Rishutoka, the daughter of the wolf tribe. In the confusion that followed, as Rishutoka pushed Karina back onto the bed and Karina reacted in shock, events unfolded beyond her understanding. Before she fully grasped what was happening, Rishutoka had become her fiancé. As the snowstorm raged outside, inside Rishutoka's house she hovered over Karina and declared once more that, having performed the tribe's traditional marriage rite, she vowed to be her faithful partner. Karina lay beneath her, bewildered, unable to comprehend who this girl truly was. Chapter 2.1 begins at that moment, immediately following Rishutoka's vow. Karina remained silent, and Rishutoka questioned whether she had frightened her. She observed that Karina had been unusually quiet. Then, as if considering another possibility, Rishutoka brushed her fingers against Karina's lips and suggested that perhaps she was simply submissive toward her partner, remarking that such a trait was adorable. Karina reacted sharply, pushing Rishutoka away and sitting upright. She demanded that Rishutoka stop making decisions on her own and questioned who had ever agreed to such a partnership. Rishutoka responded with confusion, asking whether Karina had not listened to her introduction. She identified herself as Rishutoka, daughter of the wolf tribe that dwelled in the northern lands. She added that there was no need for formal titles, since she was to be Karina's protector. Karina was stunned by the mention of the northern lands, a place rumored to be so inhospitable that no living being could survive there. Rishutoka then asked once more for Karina's name, addressing her affectionately as her princess. Karina frowned and refused, stating that she would never give her name to a kidnapper. Rishutoka stared at her before bursting into laughter, praising her strong sense of pride as another form of beauty. When Karina questioned her reaction, Rishutoka declared that in that case she would simply continue calling her princess. She admitted that names were not considered particularly important among her people. Concluding that introductions were complete, she attempted to move forward, but Karina protested that no proper introduction had taken place at all and that Rishutoka was once again acting entirely on her own whims. Without warning, Rishutoka seized Karina and pushed her back down onto the bed, announcing that they would resume their marriage vow. Karina struggled in alarm, questioning what she meant by resume. Rishutoka calmly informed her that it might cause some pain, but that she would endure it. Karina demanded that she stop and release her, yet Rishutoka leaned down and bit into her neck once more. Karina groaned as Rishutoka drank the blood that flowed from the wound. In her thoughts, Karina questioned whether this was truly what Rishutoka called a marriage vow, for it felt less like a ceremony and more like feeding. Clutching her neck in pain, she heard Rishutoka apologize and remark that Karina was so docile that, if she were not careful, she might accidentally kill her. Memories of the old tales resurfaced in Karina's mind, stories of beasts with razor-sharp fangs and powerful claws, grotesque in form beyond belief, striking under the cover of night and tormenting their victims before mercilessly ending their lives. She began to wonder if those stories had not been lies after all. As she looked at Rishutoka, who grinned with sharp teeth bared, a chill ran through her body at the sight. After a few moments, Rishutoka leaned down and licked the wound on Karina's neck. Karina attempted to protest, but just as Rishutoka was about to bite her again, a voice called out from outside. Both of them turned toward the sound. At the entrance of the tent stood two wolf men. One of them reported that the cargo had arrived at the village entrance and asked for her assistance. Rishitoka reacted with irritation, remarking that they had only just reached an enjoyable moment. Nevertheless, she conceded that it could not be helped. She apologized to Karina and asked her to wait obediently for a while. Before leaving, she placed a kiss on Karina's forehead and then exited the tent. Karina slowly sat up, whispering to herself that she had been saved. She touched her neck, feeling the sharp sting of the wound, and when she pulled her hand away, it was stained with blood. Narrowing her eyes, she scoffed bitterly. She questioned what Rishitoka meant by calling herself a partner. Such actions were not something one would do to someone they claimed to love. After a short while, Karina cautiously peeked out of the tent. She wondered whether this was truly a village of beasts. Seeing others gathered outside, she reasoned that if there were allies present, this might be her best opportunity to escape. She stepped back inside the tent and began preparing herself. Though Rishitoka had spoken of partners and vows, Karina suspected that she had only intended to use her as food. After all, the tale said that beasts toyed with humans in the darkness before devouring them. She paused as Rishitoka's earlier words echoed in her mind, praising her strong sense of pride as a form of beauty. Her gaze fell upon her clothes as memories resurfaced, her parents describing her as straightforward in personality, a man criticizing her arrogance and suggesting she learn to be more charming, women at court whispering that Lady Karina was stubborn and difficult to handle. She had always been told that she was completely different from her younger sister, Aurora. Grasping her cape, Karina moved to the tent's entrance. She let out a quiet scoff before stepping outside, scanning her surroundings carefully. Then, without hesitation, she dashed away. As Karina fled, Rishitoka's ears twitched, sensing something amiss. One of the wolf men was speaking to her about a book, calling her name to regain her attention. Rishitoka turned toward him, apologizing for her distraction as she approached them. Yet in her thoughts, a single word lingered, princess. Meanwhile, as the blizzard continued to rage, Karina was somewhere within the storm, struggling to catch her breath as she ran. Karina managed to escape from the wolf tribe's village. As she trudged through the deep snow, she observed that Rishitoka did not appear to be following her. Her plan had been simple. Once she reached an open area, she would determine the direction of her castle and find her way back. However, no matter how far she walked, the scenery remained unchanged, endless forests stretching in every direction. Without warning, her foot sank awkwardly into the snow. She cried out as she lost her footing and tumbled down the slope of a mountain. Pain shot through her body as she rolled. Cursing under her breath, she realized her legs refused to cooperate. With great effort, she dragged herself beneath a nearby tree for shelter. She reflected bitterly that she had nearly died the previous day. There was no way her strength could have fully returned in such a short time. Orlando's words echoed in her mind, condemning her to cool her foolish head in the northern lands where beasts dwelled. She questioned whether this was what he had meant by cooling down. Confusion gnawed at her thoughts. Why had that beast saved her? If she had only been meant as food, why had Rishitoka not simply left her to freeze to death? Exhaustion overtook her, and she slumped against the base of the tree. Snow continued to fall as she gazed at it with sorrowful eyes. She wondered if this was truly how her life would end, alone in the cold wilderness. She raised a hand to cover her face, but her expression hardened with resolve. She demanded of herself whose fault it was that she had ended up alone like this. Her hand clenched tightly into a fist. Her spiraling thoughts were abruptly interrupted by a voice calling out to her. The word princess rang through the storm. In the distance, she could see a figure shouting as it approached. Moments later, Rishitoka reached her side. She questioned what Karina had been thinking, reminding her that she had not yet fully recovered. She asked why she had ventured outside in such a condition. Although she was relieved to have located her by following her scent, she could not hide her frustration. Karina asked whether Rishitoka had truly come all this way just to find her. Doubt clouded her mind, and she posed a bitter question. Were humans truly so delicious that she would go to such lengths to track one down? Rishitoka responded with confusion, remarking that Karina was a strange girl. Noticing her bewilderment, she speculated that Karina had been attempting to return to her hometown. She warned that a dangerous cliff lay ahead and suggested they return to the village for now. Concern filled her voice as she asked whether Karina was injured and whether she could stand. Karina attempted to resist as Rishitoka reached out to lift her, but Rishitoka gently pointed out that remaining in the freezing cold would only bring pain. As Karina met her gaze, she sensed a genuine sincerity there. She hesitated, her resistance faltering, and quietly questioned whether Rishitoka truly meant what she seemed to feel. Suddenly, Rishitoka's ears twitched sharply. Without hesitation, she lunged toward Karina and knocked her to the ground just as an arrow sliced through the air where she had been standing. Apologizing quickly, Rishitoka remarked that this was hardly the time for a leisurely conversation. In the distance, 3 masked men stood with weapons at the ready. Karina immediately wondered if they were connected to the attackers from the previous day. The realization struck her, and she concluded that they must be agents of the prince and Aurora. Rishitoka rose to her feet and addressed the masked men, remarking that this was a precious meeting between lovers and asking whether they might refrain from interrupting. In response, the men calmly reloaded their weapons and aimed directly at Karina. Rishitoka observed their cold resolve and commented on their heartlessness. Karina urgently warned Rishitoka to be careful, explaining that these were skilled assassins. She reasoned that they would need to create an opportunity to escape, because if the men had pursued her all the way to such a remote place, they were far from ordinary criminals. A direct confrontation would leave them injured at best. Rishitoka questioned why they would need to create an opening at all. She mused that since they had crossed paths the previous day, perhaps merely chasing them off had not been sufficient. It appeared they were targeting her partner. Karina was taken aback by that statement. She realized that Rishitoka had not fled with her out of fear but had instead driven the men away. The implication dawned on her that Rishitoka might possess far greater strength than she had imagined. As Rishitoka stepped forward, she admitted she would have enjoyed playing with them longer, but her princess was cold and freezing, leaving no time for games. The masked men raised their crossbows and aimed at her. Rishitoka only laughed, declaring that it was the duty of a proper partner to protect her princess and politely requesting that they step aside. In the next instant, one of the men was violently thrown off balance as Rishitoka appeared beside him with blinding speed, shoving him away. Another man reacted in alarm and redirected his crossbow toward Karina, firing without hesitation. Rishitoka sprinted toward Karina, shouting for her and pulling her into her arms. With a powerful leap, she cleared the distance between them and the attackers, landing far from the remaining men. She instructed Karina to hold on tightly. Before Karina could even comprehend what was happening, Rishitoka leapt from the edge of a cliff. The masked men stared as the 2 figures plummeted downward. In midair, Rishitoka shouted for them to watch behind them. Drawing in a deep breath, she unleashed a thunderous roar. The force of her cry triggered the unstable snow above, sending a massive avalanche crashing down upon the men. As the snow engulfed the scene, Karina looked at Rishitoka and saw her smiling at the spectacle. After they successfully escaped, Rishitoka gently set Karina down and assured her that she was safe now. She remarked that although Karina had described those men as strong, they were hardly impressive. Compared to the forces of nature, they appeared insignificant. Karina looked at her and asked whether she herself was truly that strong. The thought seemed to amaze her. Rishitoka paused for a moment before responding with clear pride. She declared that, of course, she was strong. She was a member of the wolf tribe. There was no possibility that she would be defeated by a mere human. Moreover, even among her own people, she considered herself by far the strongest. Karina reflected that the 3 men had most likely been trained assassins sent by the first prince. Yet Rishitoka had dispatched them as though they were nothing. The old descriptions of beasts resurfaced in her mind, creatures with razor-sharp fangs and powerful claws, grotesque in form beyond belief. The legendary beasts spoken of in those tales were undoubtedly the wolf tribe. If she could bring such power to her side, everything would change. Rishitoka then urged that they should hurry before darkness fell. She extended her hand to Karina and suggested they return to the village. Karina contemplated her situation. Even if there was deception involved, she no longer cared. If she could win this tribe over, taking revenge would become effortless. That foolish prince and her detestable sister would never anticipate her return at the head of an army of beasts. The mere thought of their stunned expressions filled her with anticipation. After rising to her feet, Karina apologized for her earlier rudeness and expressed gratitude for the help she had received. She formally introduced herself as Karina and stated that she would be in Rishitoka's care from that moment onward. Rishitoka flushed with embarrassment and delight, exclaiming that Karina was even more adorable when she smiled. She grasped Karina's hand firmly and declared that she too would be in her care. Karina's eyes, however, held a determined seriousness. In her heart, she vowed that the entire kingdom would bear witness. With the strength of this beast tribe at her side, she would achieve her revenge. Everything her sister had taken from her would be reclaimed. She swore that she would take it all back. The memory began in the past, in the quiet aftermath of a departing carriage. Karina recalled the moment clearly, the fading sound of wheels against stone, the stillness that followed, and the weight of words that would alter the course of her life. When she was still a child, she had stood before her parents, confused by what she had just been told. Her mother continued explaining that Karina would become Prince Orlando's betrothed in Aurora's place. The declaration had stunned her. She had questioned why it had to be her and asked for an explanation. Her mother urged her not to resent Aurora. Her sister's body was frail and unsuited for the burdens awaiting her. To prevent involvement in the royal family's internal conflicts, His Majesty the King had requested that the Crocus family provide a bride. Prince Orlando himself had originally asked for Aurora, but given her poor health, sending her into such a volatile environment would have placed her in grave danger. Karina had wondered whether it was truly acceptable for her to take Aurora's place. After a brief silence, her father had called her name, drawing her attention back to the present. She had clenched her hands tightly and suppressed the turmoil rising within her, insisting that it was nothing and that she would become the prince's fiancée. Her mother had reassured her gently, telling her that she would be fine. Karina was a dependable girl, she had said, and she would grow into a great queen. As her mother caressed her face with tenderness, Karina found herself unable to understand those words. She questioned what it meant to be fine and what it meant to be dependable. If being dependable meant sacrificing herself in place of her sister, then she wondered whether it would have been better to act like Aurora, fragile, delicate, in need of protection. Perhaps if she had been weaker, she would not have been chosen. The memory fractured abruptly as Karina jolted awake. Her breath came in short gasps as she tried to steady herself, convincing her racing heart that it had only been a dream. The remnants of the past still clung to her thoughts as she adjusted to the present. A voice beside her called out to her as, "Princess," and she realized that Rishutoka was clinging tightly to her. Moments later, Rishutoka apologized loudly and repeatedly for her actions. She admitted that she had been craving human warmth, more specifically, Karina's warmth, because of the cold weather outside. Karina reminded her that although she had agreed to remain under her care for the time being, she had never granted permission for her to climb into her bed. Rishutoka apologized again and anxiously asked whether her princess was angry with her. Karina looked at her in silence. Within her heart, she recalled the vow she had made, to reclaim everything her sister had taken from her. She swore that she would take it all back. 2 days had passed since that night. Because of the heavy snowfall, Karina had been unable to return home. For the time being, she was forced to remain in the beast village. She glanced at Rishutoka, who was eating cheerfully without a care in the world. Rishutoka was the daughter of the beast tribe. No matter how friendly and affectionate she appeared, Karina could not bring herself to trust her. Beneath that warm exterior lay the true nature of a man-eating beast. Until she could carry out her revenge, Karina understood that she needed to remain vigilant. She could not afford to let her guard down, not even in her sleep, for fear of having her throat slit in the darkness. However, before she could concern herself with vengeance or distrust, a more immediate problem demanded her attention. The food was running out. Karina lowered her gaze to the assortment of food laid out before her and swallowed at the sight. Rishutoka noticed her hesitation and asked whether she was hungry. Karina responded that she was not, yet inwardly she could not deny the stark incompatibility between their ways of life. The difference was most apparent in their meals. There seemed to be no concept of cooking among the beasts. Fish and animal meat were served completely raw, glistening and untouched by fire, while the only accompaniment consisted of plain nuts. Although Karina had anticipated something of this sort, confronting it directly made the contrast undeniable. The beast's way of living diverged entirely from that of humans. She lifted one of the nuts and examined it carefully, wondering if it was a walnut. As she forced herself to try eating it, her eyes drifted toward Rishutoka, who was slurping loudly and tearing into the raw meat with her teeth. Karina watched in silence as Rishutoka finished her meal with evident satisfaction. She told herself that she needed to adapt, even if only slightly. After some time had passed, Karina inquired whether there were any books about the village's history. Rishutoka appeared confused by the question, prompting Karina to clarify that it felt disrespectful to remain ignorant of the wolf tribe's background, and that she wished to read any materials that might exist. Rishutoka answered that there were none. Surprised, Karina pressed further, asking whether there were truly no books at all, not even something that might describe the village. Rishutoka explained that the wolf tribe did not possess a written language. They did not record their history in texts. Instead, everything essential to life was passed down orally from one generation to the next. Karina was taken aback by this revelation. She had intended to search for texts unavailable in the central regions, hoping to uncover knowledge that might grant her an advantage over the beasts. The absence of written records dismantled that strategy entirely. Rishutoka then noted that Karina used written language. Karina affirmed that important matters should be recorded and preserved in writing. As Rishutoka pondered this, a sudden realization appeared to strike her. She declared that there was a place she wanted to show Karina and insisted they leave after finishing their meal. Karina could not hide her confusion. Once they had eaten, they departed from Rishutoka's tent and walked toward another structure. Upon arriving, Karina wondered whether it was a bookstore or a library. The thought contradicted what she had just learned, that there were supposedly no books in the village. Rishutoka loudly called out to someone inside, asking whether the person was present. As she flung open the entrance, Karina reprimanded her for being so loud. Another wolf woman emerged from within. She questioned what was happening and asked whether Rishutoka had not gone hunting that day. Rishitoka explained that starting from that day forward, she would be showing the princess around the village, as it was too restrictive to keep her confined inside her tent. Karina observed as Rishitoka and the other wolf woman greeted one another by biting each other's faces, a gesture that appeared to function as a customary display of familiarity among their kind. After a moment, the wolf woman turned her attention to Karina and inquired whether she was the princess. Karina confirmed her identity. The wolf woman smiled warmly upon learning that she was indeed Karina, remarking that it was no wonder she was engaged to Rishitoka, as she seemed to be a young lady brimming with vitality. Rishitoka readily agreed with this assessment. Karina then asked why she had been brought there and what the towering stack of books inside the tent signified. The wolf woman explained that this was the place where she conducted translation work. She admitted, somewhat embarrassed, that the village had not been untouched by the changing times. It had become increasingly difficult to remain entirely self-sufficient. In recent years, the wolf tribe had begun interacting with nearby human settlements, trading goods such as food and clothing. In order to facilitate this exchange, they translated human language into that of the wolf tribe and vice versa. Karina acknowledged her understanding of the purpose of the tent. However, the wolf woman added that they had encountered a significant problem. Although the wolves were capable of quickly learning to speak human language, they struggled to grasp human writing. She speculated that this limitation stemmed from their lack of a written language of their own. Karina reflected that this explanation made sense. Since arriving in the village, she had experienced no difficulty communicating with its inhabitants. The wolf woman confirmed that there was no language barrier in spoken conversation, as everyone in the village could speak fluently. Nevertheless, deciphering human books and letters required a considerable amount of time and effort. Rishitoka then presented the true purpose of their visit. She asked whether Karina could read the books for them and relay their contents verbally. Karina was left utterly stunned. Rishitoka told Karina that the translation work did not have to encompass every book in the collection. It would be sufficient for her to work only on those that interested her. She added that proper thanks would be given in return. Karina glanced down at the book in her hands and considered her options. She could easily refuse. However, if she intended to turn the beasts into her allies in the future, it would be wiser to maintain an appearance of goodwill and cooperation. After a brief internal deliberation, she accepted the book. At the very least, she would assist them until the snowfall subsided and she was able to leave the village. She agreed to help, though only to a limited extent. The wolf woman reacted with visible excitement at her acceptance. Karina then asked if she might sit in a particular spot within the tent, and the wolf woman readily granted her permission, encouraging her to use the space as she pleased. Seating herself, Karina opened the book and began to scan its pages. Her eyes were drawn immediately to the delicate and beautiful illustrations that adorned them. Rishitoka leaned in close beside her and inquired about what she was reading. Slightly startled by the proximity, Karina explained that the book was a fairy tale. Rishitoka sought clarification, wondering if that meant it was a legend. Karina reflected on the distinction and clarified that fairy tales differed somewhat from legends. They were old picture books, often written in archaic language, and primarily intended for children. Rishitoka expressed understanding and asked what the story was about, requesting that Karina read it aloud. After a brief pause, Karina began to narrate the contents. The story told of a child gifted with life in a world blessed by spirits, raised in a land of snow that glittered like a sea of jewels beneath a starlit sky. That small infant had grown into a beautiful princess. Cherished by all within the palace as she matured, the princess eventually became the target of monsters who sought to claim her beauty as their own. As Karina continued reading, a sudden rustling sound interrupted the quiet atmosphere of the tent. She and Rishitoka turned toward the entrance and saw 3 children standing there. Rishitoka called out to them, admonishing them for entering so abruptly. She introduced Karina to the children, explaining that she was a guest in the village. Once introductions were made, Rishitoka asked the children what had brought them there. The first child eagerly demanded stories. The second asked whether the book contained an exciting tale. The third child questioned who Karina was. Rishitoka responded by asking whether the story from the book had captured their interest. Karina flinched as the children reacted with astonishment upon realizing that she could read. They crowded forward with unrestrained curiosity, asking what the story said and protesting that it would be unfair if only Rishitoka were allowed to listen. They insisted that they wished to hear it as well. Rishitoka attempted to scold them gently, saying that they were disturbing Karina. However, Karina stated that she did not mind reading to a larger audience. One of the children asked what a princess was, while another inquired about what princesses were like. Before Karina could offer an explanation, Rishitoka provided her own description, characterizing princesses as humans like Karina, beautiful, delicate, charming, and noble. The children studied Karina with fascination. One of them asked whether she herself was a princess, while another commented on how pretty her eyes and hair were. Rishitoka readily agreed with their admiration. Karina, however, clarified that she was not truly a princess. After clearing her throat, she suggested that she continue the story. Several hours later, the reading session came to an end. The children eventually left the tent, waving enthusiastically as they bid her farewell. They expressed their gratitude and pleaded with her to inform them when she read the next part, asking that they not be excluded from hearing the continuation of the tale. They watched the children as they ran out of the tent, their small figures gradually disappearing from sight. Once they were gone, Rishitoka remarked that they were a troublesome group of little rascals. She apologized to Karina, explaining that she had not expected the children to take such an interest in the reading. Upon reflection, however, she suspected that they had likely been listening from the moment she first brought Karina into the tent. Karina let out a quiet sigh and reasoned that, as a human, she was undoubtedly a rare presence in the village. It was only natural that the children would be curious enough to sneak a look at her. Rishitoka then shifted the topic, praising Karina's skill in reading aloud. She commented that Karina possessed a wonderful voice and wondered whether she had often read stories back in her homeland. Karina hesitated before responding inwardly. She would not claim that she had done so frequently, yet memories surfaced unbidden. When they were young, Aurora had clung to her and called her big sister, pleading for her to read books aloud. Aurora had once confessed that she loved hearing her voice. Whenever Karina read to her, even though Aurora's frail body prevented her from playing outside like other children, she would no longer feel lonely. The recollection caused Karina to stiffen as she returned abruptly to the present. She dismissed the notion that she would habitually read stories to others. Rishitoka interpreted her modesty as natural kindness and insisted that such warmth must simply be part of Karina's character. Karina deflected the praise, asserting that anyone could manage as much and that Rishitoka was exaggerating her abilities. After a brief pause, Rishitoka admitted that the book Karina had been reading was one she had personally brought to the village. This revelation caught Karina's attention. Rishitoka elaborated that the book's cover had first drawn her interest. In the early days, when trade with humans had been rare, a traveling merchant had once passed through the village, and the book had been among the merchant's goods. Its cover depicted a graceful girl adorned in unusual yet beautiful clothing. The image of the princess had captivated her immediately. However, lacking the ability to read, she had never known what story lay within its pages. Discovering the tale that day had made her genuinely happy, and she expressed her gratitude to Karina for revealing it to her. Karina felt a faint warmth rise to her cheeks. She acknowledged the explanation and remarked that Rishitoka had been fortunate to obtain the book. Since there were still several days before the snowfall lessened, she resolved that she would read the entire story to Rishitoka before returning home. Even accounting for interruptions from the children, there should be sufficient time to finish it. Rishitoka focused on Karina's mention of returning. She realized that Karina had misunderstood the situation. Observing the confusion on her face, Rishitoka clarified that the reason she had brought her to the tent that day was not merely for reading, but to secure a role for her within the village. Karina was taken aback at the suggestion of a job in such a place. Rishitoka explained that since Karina would be living in the village from that point onward, having something to occupy her time would surely ease her adjustment. It was reassuring, she added, that Karina appeared to enjoy the reading and translation work. Alarmed, Karina immediately objected. She had clearly stated that she intended to return once the snowfall subsided. Rishitoka questioned why Karina would even consider returning. In her view, Karina had already become her wife. Other than the village, she wondered whether Karina truly had anywhere left to go. Startled by the sudden declaration and the intensity of Rishitoka's gaze, Karina found herself frozen in place. Rishitoka continued, remarking that it was a fortunate outcome. Surely Karina's circumstances were far more secure now. With that, she pulled Karina into a firm embrace. Rishitoka then began speaking enthusiastically about practical matters. Karina's clothing would need to be arranged properly, and perhaps they should even construct a new house, as the current dwelling felt somewhat cramped for two people. Karina's thoughts raced. It seemed as though Rishitoka fully intended for her to settle permanently in the village by her side. The casual certainty with which she spoke of their shared future left little room for doubt. Soon after, Rishitoka suggested that they return home. Far away in the royal capital of Lux, Orlando stood reviewing a report. The servant before him trembled as Orlando reacted with visible anger upon learning that contact had been lost with the assassins sent after Karina. The servant explained that multiple corpses had been discovered at the foot of the mountains. It was assumed that the group had been counterattacked. Orlando struggled to accept the explanation. Karina had supposedly been accompanied by only a handful of servants. He questioned who could possibly have been capable of eliminating trained killers. Although he had referred to them as assassins, he admitted to himself that they had likely been nothing more than washed-up mercenaries. Perhaps they had grown careless, lost their footing, and fallen into the valley during the attempt. The incompetence irritated him. He was weary of relying on useless men whose failures only created more work for him to conceal and correct. After a moment of contemplation, Orlando resolved to dispatch his regular forces instead. Eliminating a single woman should not require much effort. With trained operatives, the matter would be concluded swiftly. At that moment, Aurora entered and offered her greetings. Orlando's mood shifted immediately upon seeing her. Aurora calmly advised that there was no need to mobilize the army for a single target. Such a conspicuous operation would inevitably attract attention and risk arousing Karina's suspicion. Orlando asked for her recommendation. He invited his beloved Aurora to speak freely. Aurora then proposed that the matter be entrusted entirely to her. In the northern lands, Karina stepped out of Rishutoka's tent and was immediately met by the biting cold. The air stung her skin, and her breath turned white before her eyes. It had snowed the day before and the day prior to that, and even now the snow continued to fall without pause. She found herself wondering how much longer it would be before she could finally leave the village. Earlier that morning, she had seen Rishutoka preparing to depart. As Rishutoka adjusted her clothing and readied herself, Karina had asked whether she was going somewhere. Rishutoka had turned toward her cheerfully, remarking that she was already awake. She explained that she had matters to attend to that day. Though she acknowledged that Karina might feel lonely in her absence, she urged her to wait obediently until she returned. Karina had been taken aback. The very person who had insisted she remain in the village was now leaving her behind without hesitation. She questioned whether she was truly meant to stay there alone. Suddenly, Rishutoka had grasped both of her hands with fervor, declaring that she understood how she felt. She insisted that she, too, did not wish to be separated. However, there was no need for concern. Karina had been about to protest that she was not worried at all, but she caught herself in time. Instead, she forced herself to respond in a manner befitting someone who cared, claiming that she would indeed feel very lonely. Once Rishutoka was no longer watching her expression so closely, Karina reminded herself that she needed to maintain the pretense of affection and harmony. Revealing her true feelings would only jeopardize her plans. It had been a close call. After a brief silence, Rishutoka admitted that leaving her alone was not ideal, but she had made arrangements as compensation. She revealed that she had prepared a separate room for Karina. Recalling the previous night, she mentioned that Karina had seemed displeased when she climbed into bed beside her. Rishutoka confessed that she had not realized humans placed such importance on having personal space. Karina reflected on the incident from the day before. She believed that the matter had been more than a simple issue of privacy, though she did not elaborate. Rishutoka laughed lightly and apologized again before drawing aside a curtain and inviting Karina to look inside, confident that she would approve. Karina stepped forward and found herself staring at a beautifully crafted room. She surveyed the space carefully. The drawers, pillows, chests, and various furnishings were all rendered in a vivid shade of blue, reminiscent of a clear winter sky stretched across frozen air. The craftsmanship was precise and deliberate, the arrangement thoughtful. Rishutoka eagerly asked for her opinion. Karina responded that it was acceptable, neither lavishly praising nor openly criticizing it. Rishutoka laughed once more, clearly satisfied that Karina was pleased. As her fingers brushed against the smooth surface of the furniture, Karina felt a complex mixture of emotions. Despite the effort that had gone into preparing the room, she remained struck by what she perceived as the beast tribe's self-centered nature. They acted decisively according to their own assumptions, rarely pausing to consider her true wishes. She reminded herself of her objective. The books needed to be translated as quickly as possible. If she could secure their assistance, she would be able to pursue her revenge. She had to accomplish this before prolonged confinement in the village eroded her composure entirely. The memory of Rishutoka's earlier gratitude resurfaced in her mind, her earnest happiness upon finally learning the contents of the book, her sincere thanks. Karina dismissed the thought coldly, deeming such sentiment foolish. Karina continued reading the story before her. It told of a child gifted with life in a world blessed by the spirits of nature, a small babe who grew into a beautiful princess. Cherished by all as she was raised within the palace, the princess became the object of desire from monsters who sought to claim her beauty for themselves. As time passed, even those within the palace wearied of constantly protecting her. Those who grew tired were none other than her own family. Her father, the king, declared that peace would come if she sacrificed herself. Her mother spoke of destiny, insisting that this was the path laid out for her. Thus, on a day when violent snowstorms raged without mercy, the princess was led deep into the depths of a dark and foreboding forest. The one who escorted her released her hand and departed without hesitation. Watching their retreating figure, the princess questioned whether she was truly being abandoned there. No answer came in return. As the words unfolded across the page, Karina's thoughts drifted inward. She herself had once been accepted into the royal household as the future queen. Yet because Orlando desired Aurora as his betrothed, he had soon lost interest in her. Even so, she had not believed herself alone. She had occupied a central position within the court. Holding the title of the crown prince's fiancé had its advantages. As long as she bore that designation, people gravitated toward her, regardless of the prince's indifference. Some flattered her shamelessly, others feigned friendship, and still others whispered that their actions were for her own good, as though they derived pleasure from offering themselves up in sacrifice. Now, she questioned the sincerity of all of it. On the day she was expelled from the capital and sent toward this distant borderland, not a single one of them had appeared to see her off. She remembered standing before the carriage, gazing back at the castle walls. Within those walls, Aurora had watched her departure as she stepped inside the carriage. In the end, Karina concluded that she had been the only one who believed she was not alone. Returning to the present, she sat quietly and glanced around the blue-hued room. Rishitoka's earlier words echoed in her mind, expressing satisfaction that Karina seemed pleased with the space. Karina reflected bitterly on the inconsistency. There had been so much talk about being a good partner, about building a life together, and yet Rishitoka had promptly left her alone in the village. It seemed that Rishitoka simply acted according to her own will, unconcerned with deeper consideration. Lowering her gaze back to the book, Karina resumed reading. In the story, the princess was alone in the dark forest, surrounded by lurking monsters hidden between the trees. Low growls echoed from behind her, while cruel laughter resounded ahead. She wandered through the forest for days, until the snow caused her to lose her footing. The cold seeped into her body, and the flame of her life began to fade. At that moment, a voice called out to her, asking what troubled such a pretty lady. It was a wolf who resided within the forest. The wolf regarded her with pity and offered her shelter, suggesting that she rest at her home if she so wished. And so, they set off together. After walking for some time, they arrived at a small house. The structure was blue and appeared to be made entirely of ice. Karina's eyes slowly lifted from the page as she looked around the room once more. The same colors surrounded her now. Karina continued reading. In the story, the princess was welcomed into an entirely blue home. The bed was blue, the furniture was blue, and even the walls shimmered in icy shades of blue. Every item within the house was exquisitely crafted and pleasing to the eye. The princess found herself immediately drawn to its beauty. Yet the house was made of ice, and no matter how lovely it appeared, it could not provide warmth to her freezing body. The wolf then declared that she would create a true home for the two of them. According to legend, on the day of the year when the snowfall was heaviest, if one journeyed to the hill in the east and built a house from the fir trees growing there, the spirits would bestow their blessing upon the wolf. Such a house, warm and sturdy, would be the perfect dwelling for them both. The princess agreed, and without hesitation, the wolf set off to carry out the task. When the new house was completed, it was warm and welcoming, unlike the fragile structure of ice. Within its walls, the princess could finally sleep in peace. On the first night they spent together in their new home, the wolf reached up and plucked a star from the sky. She offered it as proof of her vow to make the princess happy. The princess took a bite of the star before returning it, expressing her wish that they share it and find happiness together. As the words settled in her mind, Karina's thoughts drifted to something Rishitoka had once said. She recalled being asked whether she had failed to notice something. In the snowy mountains, when she herself had been starving, Rishitoka had given her prey to eat. The memory lingered uncomfortably. The parallels between the story and her own circumstances were difficult to ignore. Yet she resisted the implication. Their first meeting had been a coincidence, had it not? And the blue furnishings in her room, were those, too, merely coincidence? Turning to the final page, she found the words indicating that the story would continue. The tale was unfinished. Her thoughts began to scatter in uncertainty. At that moment, the tent flap burst open, and Rishitoka entered energetically, announcing her return and apologizing for the long wait. Karina composed herself and welcomed her back, asking where she had gone. Rishitoka responded playfully, implying that Karina's curiosity was evident, but she was not yet willing to reveal the details. She did, however, mention that she had gone to the hill in the east. Karina froze at those words. The line from the story echoed clearly in her mind. On the day of the heaviest snowfall, one must go to the hill in the east and build a house from the fir trees there to receive the spirit's blessing. Almost unconsciously, she repeated the phrase to herself. Rishitoka noticed the shift in her expression. Her gaze then fell upon the open book behind Karina. With visible excitement, she asked whether the translation had already been completed and whether Karina had read the next part. She wanted to know what happened afterward. Karina struggled to find a response, but her composure faltered when Rishitoka remarked that the princess in the book bore a striking resemblance to her. The comparison left Karina momentarily speechless. Rishitoka continued, recalling that when they first met, she had nearly believed that the princess from the story had stepped out from its pages and come to life before her eyes. Rishitoka continued comparing Karina to the princess from the book, remarking upon how striking the resemblance seemed the more she looked. To her, It felt as though fate had granted her the rare fortune of encountering the princess of her dreams in reality. Karina observed the unguarded admiration in Rishutoka's expression. In that moment, memories of her life back in Chloria resurfaced, of the courtiers and attendants who had once surrounded her, doting on her with flattery and affection, yet ultimately failing to stand by her when it mattered most. The warmth they had shown her had proven shallow. In her mind, Rishutoka was no different. She concluded that Rishutoka's interest was not truly in her as a person. What she saw instead was a convenient substitute for the princess from her cherished story. All this beastkin saw was an image that fulfilled a fantasy, not the real Karina who stood before her. When she finally responded, she excused her momentary silence as having been lost in thought. Rishutoka immediately grew concerned, wondering whether she was feeling unwell or if the effort of translating the book had exhausted her. Karina redirected the conversation to the book itself. She explained that the story was incomplete and likely had a continuation somewhere. If one were curious about what happened next, it would be unpleasant to wait too long without resolution. Therefore, should Rishutoka manage to find the next volume, she would read it aloud once more. Rishutoka's face brightened with unmistakable delight. She sprang forward to embrace Karina, expressing how much she looked forward to it. Left within the circle of that enthusiasm, Karina chastised herself internally. How childish she had become, allowing herself to be momentarily swayed by such simple gestures. Rishutoka was merely a means to an end, a tool she intended to use in order to exact her revenge. Whatever feelings stirred within her were irrelevant. They held no value. She reminded herself that she only needed to maintain the illusion when standing before Rishutoka. Whether it was love or any other tender sentiment, all of it was equally foolish. Outwardly, she matched Rishutoka's anticipation and affirmed that she, too, looked forward to the continuation of the story. Chapter 5 begins in the northern lands, on the eastern hill. The sounds of construction rang out as the wolfkin worked together to build a house. Voices called out in all directions, asking for help lifting materials, checking if supplies remained, warning others to be careful in high places, and telling someone not to recklessly throw things. One of the wolfkin shouted at Rishutoka not to toss objects toward him. Karina sat near the construction site, quietly watching the progress. The wolf woman with an eye patch appeared beside her and remarked that it was finally starting to take shape. She observed that it would be a new house for the two of them. Even though their current house was not particularly cramped, Rishutoka seemed highly motivated to build another one regardless. Karina reflected that immediately after returning from gathering materials, Rishutoka had begun constructing their new home without delay. There was a belief that on the day of the year with the heaviest snowfall, if one went to the eastern hill and built a house from the fir trees growing there, the spirits would bless it. When Karina responded that Rishutoka was indeed motivated, the wolf woman teased her about her lukewarm reply, wondering if she had already lost her enthusiasm. Their conversation was interrupted by Rishutoka shouting from a distance, accusing the wolf woman of speaking too cheerfully and warning her not to flirt with Karina while she was away. She even called the wolf woman a thief trying to steal Karina from her. The wolf woman protested internally, wondering why Rishutoka thought so poorly of her, since she had only been keeping Karina company because she seemed lonely after being left alone. Startled, Rishutoka rushed over and embraced Karina, pleading with her to wait just a little longer and promising to shower her with affection once the house was finished. Karina paused before thanking her. Rishutoka responded emotionally, praising Karina's kindness, while Karina questioned whether she truly was as kind as claimed. The wolf woman then excused herself, saying she would see the two of them later. After the eye-patched wolf woman departed, Rishutoka mentioned that while she had gone to gather wood, she had seen a very strange building from the top of the hill. Karina asked what she meant. Rishutoka explained that she had intended to tell Karina earlier but had completely forgotten. The building resembled the ones in town, yet it was enormous, almost as large as the place where the princess had lived in that book. She had never imagined such a structure truly existed. Karina asked whether the place where the princess lived meant a castle. Rishutoka realized that was the proper term. She described it as an incredible structure and wondered if a princess might be living there as well. Karina reflected on the existence of a large castle in these northern lands. There were very few structures here that could truly be called castles, and most of them had long since been abandoned, reduced to crumbling ruins. Only one remained intact and in use. Karina concluded that the castle Rishutoka had seen must have been her own. Rishutoka reacted in astonishment at the idea that it belonged to Karina. Karina affirmed that it was indeed hers. When she had gone to assess the situation outside, she had been pursued by assassins. It was during her desperate attempt to escape them that she encountered Rishutoka, though she privately amended that perhaps kidnapped by would be a more accurate description than met. Rishutoka came to an understanding and enthusiastically remarked that this made Karina even more like the ideal princess, having lived in such a magnificent castle. Karina then asked what the castle had looked like. She mentioned that she had left only a couple of servants behind, and with their mistress gone, she assumed they would have fled. Rishitoka repeated the detail about only a couple of servants, puzzled. Karina confirmed it. Rishitoka found this difficult to reconcile with what she had seen. Karina noticed her confusion and asked whether she had said something strange. Rishitoka explained that the castle she had observed could not have been Karina's. There had been many people living there, far more than just a few servants. Numerous horses had been tied up outside, and light had shone from every window. If only a handful of people were living there, there would be no reason to keep every room illuminated. She wondered whether Karina had done so while she was still there. Karina clarified that they had only lit the rooms they were actively using. Rishitoka concluded that it must have been a different castle. Karina lowered her gaze before calling out to Rishitoka. She asked whether she would like to go see that castle again. Rishitoka questioned the sudden suggestion. Karina explained that she had not known of any other castles in these lands besides her own, and she wished to see it with her own eyes. Moreover, she considered it a good opportunity to go on a date with Rishitoka. Rishitoka asked what a date was. Karina explained that where she came from, a date was when a couple went out together to have fun and strengthen their love. She asked what Rishitoka thought of the idea. Rishitoka understood that it was Karina's way of spending time together as a couple and enthusiastically agreed. They would go see the castle together. However, as Karina considered the details, the large number of servants, the many horses, the windows aglow with light, all of it differed from her memories of her own castle. A sense of unease settled over her, and she felt a bad premonition about what they might discover. After they had been traveling for some time toward the castle, Karina noticed the unmistakable aftermath of an avalanche along the path. The sight confirmed her suspicion. It must have been her castle that Rishitoka had seen after all. But if that were the case, why had it changed? That place had been the only home Karina had left. Lost in thought, she suddenly came to a halt when Rishitoka announced that they had arrived. Before them stood the massive castle. Rishitoka marveled at its size and even mused that perhaps their new house should be built just as large. Karina, however, stared at it in silence. It had once been a dark and gloomy structure, a constant reminder of her exile to the northern lands, almost as if it mocked her existence. Now, it looked entirely different. She could not comprehend what had happened. Karina stepped inside the castle. The moment she crossed the threshold, servants rushed toward her, offering greetings. She ignored them and instead surveyed her surroundings, carefully observing the interior. She could barely recognize the place. The decorations were so extravagant that they resembled something else entirely. Her thoughts were abruptly interrupted by the sound of something crashing to the floor. Turning toward the noise, she saw Seal standing there, visibly shocked. Seal hurried toward her in a panic, overjoyed that Karina was unharmed. She explained that they had been searching for her the entire time. When Karina attempted to speak, Seal continued, recounting how violent tremors had shaken the earth after her departure, and she had feared the worst. Relief flooded her as she expressed gratitude that Karina was safe. Karina redirected the conversation, demanding to know what had happened to the castle. Seal quickly explained that Lady Aurora had come to visit. At the mention of Aurora's name, Karina's expression darkened. Seal elaborated, pointing out the newly furnished decorations, the refined furniture, and the additional servants. Lady Aurora had said it would be terribly unpleasant for Karina to spend the winter in such a dreary castle. In addition, Aurora had brought something with her, claiming she did not want Karina to feel lonely and that she herself no longer needed it. Seal mentioned that it was something very precious to the two of them, praising Aurora's kindness. As Seal spoke, Karina imagined Aurora's voice behind those words, pitying her for spending winter in a miserable castle, referring to her as a poor older sister, and declaring that she would return something because she had no more use for it. Without warning, Karina struck the small stuffed dog from Seal's hands. The toy fell to the floor, and Karina ground it beneath her heel. Seal cried out in shock at Karina's behavior. In response, Karina coldly declared that Seal was nothing more than a mediocre and incompetent maid. She demanded to know whom Seal truly served. The answer was obvious: Aurora, the prince's current fiancée. That realization explained everything. Seal had allowed Aurora into Karina's castle without permission and permitted her to alter it freely because, in her heart, she regarded Aurora as her true master. Seal fell into desperate apology, insisting that she would never betray her lady. However, Karina cut her off sharply. She stated that she had tolerated enough already. First, Seal had disobeyed her, and now she dared to speak back. Karina warned her not to disappoint her any further. Karina turned away from Seal as her name was called, her thoughts dark and bitter. She reflected on her hated sister and wondered what Aurora had expected her to feel upon returning after being forced away from the castle. During her absence, even the one place she had been able to call home had been tainted by Aurora's presence. Karina expressed that she felt sorry for Seal having to remain in a castle like this. However, she reassured her that there was no need to worry, because she herself would not be returning. When Seal questioned what she meant, Karina declared that she had finally found a true home for herself, and that she would be leaving with it. Rishitoka remained silent as Karina embraced her. Karina stated that today marked a farewell, to Seal and to the castle alike. She instructed that no one was to be allowed inside again. In her heart, she resolved that she would never let her home be taken from her another time. She sought confirmation that her words were understood. Snow fell steadily as Karina and Rishitoka walked away from the castle. Rishitoka confirmed that the castle they had visited truly had been Karina's. Karina acknowledged that it had been, though it had changed so drastically that she no longer considered it hers. She revealed that she had once been the fiancée of the prince of this country and had been destined to become a true princess. Yet her sister had taken everything from her. Karina confessed her desire for revenge against the country. At the same time, she declared that she intended to become the happiest person in the world. She asked whether Rishitoka would lend her strength. The two of them would leave together, just the two of them, and enjoy themselves freely. They would embark on a long date. Rishitoka questioned whether that was truly what Karina desired. Karina affirmed that it was her most cherished wish. Rishitoka laughed softly and declared that she would never ignore the wishes of her beloved princess. She pledged herself as Karina's faithful partner. Karina smiled, thinking that there was now nothing left for Aurora to take from her. In the distance, those remaining at the castle felt the earth tremble once more. An avalanche descended upon them. Servants attempted to flee, crying out for help, but they were ultimately swallowed by the crushing snow. Karina offered her gratitude to Rishitoka. Rishitoka told Karina that she belonged to her alone, declaring her love. The avalanche consumed everything in its path, and when it settled, only the small stuffed toy remained, half buried beneath the snow. Chapter 6 opens with a recollection from a little girl. In a picture book from the human kingdom that she had read when she was young, there was a story about a lonely princess abandoned by her family. With the help of her friend, that princess was able to make her wishes come true. Yet the girl could no longer clearly remember whether, at the end of their tale of revenge, what awaited the two of them was truly happiness. The scene shifts to the kingdom of Chloria, in the year 492 of the royal era, at the capital's Lux court, within the Secretariat's historical archives. Inside the archive room, scribes quietly gossip among themselves, whispering about rumors of a witch said to be wandering through the city. Another scribe dismisses the tale, mentioning that some claim it is actually the spirit of His Highness's former fiancée. She considers the idea absurd, insisting that witches do not exist and that such stories are nothing more than superstition. At one of the desks, a scribe continues writing when someone repeatedly calls out her name. The scribe, Yves Solis, responds promptly. A man approaches and hands her a document she had requested earlier, asking whether he retrieved the correct one. Eve confirms that it is indeed the right document and thanks him enthusiastically. The man collapses into the chair across from her and complains about the ordeal of obtaining it. The librarian had been unwilling to release the document, even after being told that it was necessary for the compilation and preservation of significant historical records. Despite the resistance, he had managed to sneak it out. He reminds Eve to summarize it properly so that his efforts would not be wasted, especially since it concerns the Crown Princess scandal. Eve assures him that she will produce an excellent write-up. She is a scribe serving at the royal court of the Kingdom of Chloria. Her primary responsibilities involve compiling and archiving historical documents. At present, she is tasked with organizing records regarding the Crown Princess scandal that took place 2 years prior. As Eve reads through the book, she reviews the account. Several years ago, a woman had been accepted into the royal family as the Crown Prince's fiancée. However, she was described as unusually cruel. Provoked by what was characterized as her arrogant and shameless conduct, the Crown Prince annulled their engagement and exiled her to the northern lands. According to rumors, misfortune soon befell her, and she perished in an avalanche not long afterward. She had been the daughter of a provincial noble, and her name was... Eve stops abruptly upon reaching a page that has been burned. The text where the name should have been is completely destroyed. She concludes to herself that it must have been deliberately removed. The woman's name is gone. In Eve's mind, after having researched the matter for several months, she had come to a clear realization. Although there were numerous documents and reports detailing the general outline of the incident, there were scarcely any descriptions of the woman at the center of it. Eve let out a quiet sigh and reflected that understanding the individual herself was essential to properly compiling a comprehensive record of the case. Yet there was almost nothing left about her. She could not help but question why so little information remained. Suddenly, the archives stirred with hushed whispers. Someone announced the arrival of the king. A scribe expressed astonishment that His Majesty would personally visit their modest halls. The king responded calmly, stating that he trusted the compilation of the archives was progressing smoothly. A scribe reassured him that everything was proceeding without issue. The king acknowledged this and then allowed his gaze to fall upon Eve. He inquired whether she was the young woman who had graduated at the top of her class among the scribes the previous year. Eve reacted with surprise that the king remembered her. He affirmed that he did, noting that he had heard of her talent, having become the youngest court scribe in history, and, notably, a woman at that. He expressed a desire to see what she was currently working on, suggesting that she might be willing to show him. Eagerly, Eve presented her work. The king flipped through the pages and read the title, a record concerning the condemnation of the former crown princess to be for her crimes. Eve explained that reference materials were scarce, so the draft was still rough, but once completed it would. Before she could finish, the king's tone turned serious. He stated that it was truly unfortunate, but all mentions of the so-called crown princess scandal were to be erased. Eve stood frozen as she watched him tear her document cleanly in two. The word erased echoed in her mind. The king announced his disappointment. He had already ordered that all records related to the matter be disposed of, yet some still remained. He commanded that everything connected to it be destroyed immediately. As Eve struggled to respond, the king added that since she had only recently begun her service at court and considering her inexperience, he would overlook this transgression. He declared that his kingdom would not have a history that included welcoming such a wicked villainess into the royal family. He demanded that this be understood. Eve found herself unable to speak. The king then addressed the other scribes, instructing them to properly educate her. One of them affirmed the order. Several hours later, after the incident had concluded, Eve remained at her desk, overwhelmed with frustration. She reflected on how much effort she had poured into that document. It had become clear that to the royal family, the act of once accepting such an infamous woman as a fiancée was considered a stain upon their history. Because of that, they intended to preserve no record of what had occurred. Eve found the situation absurd. She struck her fist against the table and clenched her teeth, thinking bitterly that the royals were simply falsifying and rewriting history to suit themselves. The notion of legitimate historical records seemed hollow to her now. What legitimacy could there be under such manipulation? One of the other scribes noticed the intensity of her anger and remarked upon the dangerous aura surrounding her. Eve fumed inwardly, convinced that the royals were simply attempting to cover everything up. On top of that, she could not ignore the waste of fine paper. She wondered whether the king had any idea how much a single sheaf cost. Tears welled up in her eyes despite her frustration. She scolded herself harshly, calling herself foolish and weak, urging herself not to cry. She wiped her tears away and reflected on how distant and remote the village of her birth now felt. Her thoughts drifted back to her childhood. She remembered standing in a forest with her parents while someone warned them that once they left the village, they would never be allowed to return. They were asked if they were truly certain about leaving. Her father had replied firmly that they must, because in a village, opportunities like these would not last forever. Not long after, while Eve was still young, her parents left their village and took her with them. They eventually settled in a small town near Lux. It was there that Eve saw books for the first time in her life. She discovered that books could hold magnificent stories imagined by people, as well as accounts of events that had truly occurred. Regardless of their nature, she was captivated by the idea that through writing, facts and stories alike could be preserved for decades or even centuries. At some point, this fascination grew into a dream. She wanted to record the things she had seen and heard, and leave them behind for the world of tomorrow. Returning to the present, Eve sighed heavily. The destroyed document had been the first assignment she had received since being hired at the court. Adding to her frustration, her colleagues had immediately burned all related documents after being reprimanded. Earlier, they had apologized to her, explaining that given the king's direct order, their hands were tied. Eve could not help but question where their pride as scribes had gone. Even so, from what little she had been able to gather in her research, the former crown princess appeared to have been a woman destined for condemnation sooner or later. Accepting such a person into the royal family would have undoubtedly harmed their public image. In that sense, Eve could understand the king's perspective. Yet she rejected that reasoning outright. It made no sense to her. This marked her second outburst of the day. She reasoned that the royals could not simply erase history because it embarrassed them. If they believed every trace of the woman needed to be erased, then had it not been a grave mistake to make such a villainess the crown prince's fiancée in the first place? She paused, questioning why the royal family had ever welcomed someone who was supposedly destined for condemnation. If she had truly been so wicked that her very name needed to be erased from the annals of history, surely there would have been an investigation before accepting her as the crown prince's betrothed. Eve recalled her long-held dream, to record what she had seen and heard and leave it for the future. She did not know how long she would be permitted to work at the court, so she could not allow this opportunity to slip away. It had been her aspiration for as long as she could remember. This time, it would not matter whether her findings were included in the official national records. She resolved that she would investigate the crown princess scandal herself. A short while later, Eve found herself visiting the residence of one of the royal consorts. The consort inquired whether Eve wished to learn more about the crown prince's former fiancé. Eve confirmed that she did and expressed her sincere gratitude for any recollections the consort could share, no matter how trivial they might seem. The consort remarked that the request was rather sudden, and she was uncertain what to say at first. Then she recalled that the former fiancé had apparently opened a salon nearly every day, inviting numerous nobles to attend lavish gatherings. The salon itself was said to have been excessively extravagant. The consort wondered how much of the royal treasury had been consumed by those events. Still, she noted that the woman was now buried somewhere in the borderlands, according to what she had heard. It was a pitiable fate. She mused that His Highness might have shown her at least a little more sympathy. Yet less than a year after the former fiancé's passing, he was preparing to wed her sister. Perhaps, she suggested, he was simply capricious. Even so, with the former fiancé gone, men had begun paying visits to her instead, which she found delightful. After concluding her conversation with the consort, Eve approached a nobleman. Upon hearing the topic, he reacted with discomfort and requested that the former fiancé not be mentioned. He had believed her to be dead. The castle to which she had been exiled had been swallowed by an avalanche, had it not? He added that she had a habit of making unreasonable demands of anyone who approached her, and therefore he doubted many people had mourned her departure. He had even heard that some individuals had donated their entire fortunes to her. Continuing her inquiries, Eve sought out another nobleman. He described the former fiancé as someone who spoke as though she were the most important person alive, as if the entire world revolved around her. In his view, she had been far too full of herself simply because she was betrothed to the crown prince. He considered her a pitiable woman. By the end of the day, after completing her investigation, Eve found herself seated on a bench just outside the castle grounds. She let out a weary sigh as she reviewed her notes. The accusations were consistent: misuse of funds, immoral conduct, a lack of manners and respect. She could not say that she had uncovered much new information. Reflecting on what she had gathered, Eve considered that the rumors surrounding the crown prince's former fiancé appeared to be largely consistent. Perhaps questioning why the royal family had accepted someone like her into their ranks was, in the end, beside the point. As Eve sat reviewing her notes, a woman cloaked in a dark veil suddenly appeared before her. The woman asked whether Eve was the one who had been investigating the crown prince's former fiancé. Eve looked up at her and confirmed that she was, then asked who the woman might be. The veiled woman explained that she had once worked as a maidservant for the former fiancé's family. Having heard that someone was making inquiries about her, she had decided to seek that person out and speak with them, if possible. Eve responded eagerly. She explained that almost nothing about the former fiancé remained within the court records, and she implored the woman to share whatever she knew, no matter how insignificant it might seem. The former maidservant acknowledged her request and agreed to recount everything she could remember. However, before doing so, she asked Eve to promise her one thing. Eve asked what that promise would entail. The woman said that she wanted Eve to bring the truth about the former prospective crown princess to light. She spoke of how she had once adored her lady. She had been kind, well-mannered, and had never voiced a single complaint. The woman wished for Eve to investigate why Karina, had become so cruel, and to uncover the reason behind that transformation. She pleaded earnestly for Eve's help. Chapter 7 begins with Eve listening as the self-proclaimed former maidservant expresses her wish that the reason behind Karina's cruelty be investigated, hoping that through such an inquiry she might come to understand it as well. Eve fixes her gaze upon the woman and questions who Karina is. In response, the former maidservant explains that Karina Amandia Crocus was the name of the crown prince's previous fiancé. She goes on to recount that although the Crocus family was distantly related to the royal family, their status was by no means high enough to justify selecting a daughter of House Crocus as the crown prince's fiancée over the daughters of far more influential noble houses. However, in recent years the palace had been plagued by factional strife and repeated attempts at consolidating power by members of the royal family's extended relatives. Amidst such instability, the royal household sought a solution that would prevent further political entanglements. They decided upon a daughter of the Crocus family, one who had remained uninvolved in court politics, to serve as a neutral buffer against the turbulent ambitions swirling within the palace. What the royal family required was someone who would steadfastly support His Highness through the upheaval and faithfully fulfill her duties as princess consort. The former maidservant's thoughts drift back to her time at the Crocus estate. She recalls that the royal family had initially set their sights on the younger daughter of House Crocus, Aurora. Lady Aurora was known to be wise and prudent. Though reserved and sparing with her words, this very quality had likely convinced the royal family that she would make a suitable consort for His Highness. Unfortunately, Aurora had been a frail child, prone to fever from even the slightest exertion. The rigors of court life would have been unendurable for her, making it inconceivable that she could survive in the king's court. Thus, her elder sister Karina was nominated in her place. Karina had been a child who never once defied her parents. She had never been seen opposing their wishes, nor had she ever disrespected her family's customs or rules. As an older sister, she had been exemplary, always placing her younger sibling before herself. She was not the wicked villainess whispered about in malicious rumors, but a dignified lady capable of holding her head high wherever she stood. For these reasons, everyone had believed she would become a splendid princess consort. Eve is left speechless by this account. The former maid-servant apologizes, remarking that speaking in such a way brings back painful memories. Eve gently stops her from continuing her apology. The woman then steadies herself and acknowledges that she does not deny Karina's eventual reputation as a villainess in the king's court and throughout the kingdom. Yet she insists that the Karina they had once known was not that kind of person. Eve finds it difficult to reconcile this with what she knows. The former maid-servant continues, suggesting that perhaps she is merely searching for something, anything, that might allow her to remember Karina fondly. She implores Eve that even the smallest fragment of the Lady Karina within the infamous villainess would suffice. If Eve could uncover even a trace of that former self, the maid-servant would be deeply indebted to her. Overwhelmed by the conversation, Eve can scarcely believe what she has heard. Afterward, she bows to the former maid-servant in gratitude. Later, alone in her room, Eve reflects on the encounter. It becomes clear to her that this former maid-servant of the Crocus family knows nothing about the former princess consort's life after she entered the royal court. Stretching her arms, Eve acknowledges to herself that no matter how thoroughly she investigates, there is simply no information regarding the former crown princess to be following her arrival at court. In the end, she realizes that she can do nothing but speculate. Eve reflects upon the fragments gathered during her investigation. She remembers the former maidservant's assertion that Karina had been a lady capable of proudly holding her head high wherever she found herself. She recalls as well the consort's account that Karina had once summoned numerous nobles to lavish and extravagant gatherings. The former maidservant had spoken with conviction that they had all believed Karina would become a splendid princess consort. In contrast, Eve also remembers a nobleman remarking that few had likely mourned her departure, and another declaring that Karina had been excessively self-important merely because she was the crown prince's fiancée. Alone with these conflicting testimonies, Eve contemplates the two images before her: Karina, the eldest daughter of House Crocus, and Karina, the crown princess-to-be. The impressions are irreconcilable, so starkly different that they seem to describe entirely separate individuals. She wonders whether Karina's disposition had always been so unpleasant, concealed beneath propriety until the moment arrived when she could wield authority openly. The thought arises that the former maid-servant might have been lying in her defense. Yet the woman's demeanor had seemed far too sincere, her grief too unfeigned to be mere fabrication. Eve's thoughts shift to another possibility, that some catalyst had transformed Karina. She recalls the former maidservant's words about how Aurora had originally been chosen, only for frailty to render her unsuitable, leading to Karina's nomination in her stead. A question takes shape in Eve's mind. Had Karina harbored such deep resentment toward the engagement to the crown prince that it had altered her entire personality? Elsewhere, in a different setting altogether, the resonant clang of a bell reverberates through the air. A man's voice rises, proclaiming that the saintess shall now become the Holy Mother and must offer herself for the sake of the village and for the world. Villagers join in fervent chants, calling upon the saintess to deliver the divine child. The man declares that only through this act may they prosper for eternity. As the chanting swells in intensity, he commands obedience to the oracle and orders her to enter sacred matrimony. Amid the collective voices, a girl's cry pierces through, pleading for someone, anyone, to help her and take her away. The villagers' voices grow louder still, urging the saintess to conceive the divine child. Suddenly, a shout breaks through the uproar, announcing that the saintess has escaped. Another command follows to bring her back. The girl's desperate plea calls out to Miss Wolf for salvation. Eve startles awake, lifting her head slowly from where it had rested upon the table. She glances toward the window and sees birds singing in the morning light. Realization dawns upon her that she had fallen asleep. The dream lingers vividly in her mind, another memory that draws her backward into something long buried. Rising from her seat, she inadvertently dislodges one of the pages from her investigation, and as it falls upon the table, her expression hardens into seriousness. A short while later, Eve makes her way to the archives. There, the scribe looks up in surprise at her request for a holiday and wonders whether it has anything to do with what transpired with the king the other day. Eve quickly denies any such connection, explaining that she has simply realized she has not taken a single day off since she began working there. It occurs to her that perhaps she might visit her family and rest for a short while. The scribe nods in understanding and asks where her family resides, questioning whether it is far from the capital. Eve informs him that they live on the outskirts of Zenus. He remarks that it is merely the neighboring city, closer than he had expected. Conceding readily, he grants her leave, observing that she is always diligent in her duties and deserves the respite. Eve expresses her gratitude. The scribe laughs lightly, though he adds that work will undoubtedly slow down without her presence, so she should make an effort to return promptly. Eve assures him she understands, and after bidding farewell to the scribes, she takes her leave. Later, she speaks with a carriage driver and climbs into his carriage. As the wheels begin to rattle along the road, she gazes out the window. The steady rhythm of the journey lulls her thoughts inward, and the phrase, "an unwanted marriage," surfaces in her mind. It is something she has heard before. On the outskirts of the city of Zenus, children are at play. Their lively voices fill the air as one urges a song to be sung, another excitedly points out a drawing, and yet another asks whether someone might join in their games. The children gather around a woman who responds with a weary groan, reminding them that she can only attend to one at a time and that everyone must wait their turn. The distant rattle of an approaching carriage interrupts the bustle. The woman looks up and calls out excitedly, announcing Eve's return. In the distance, a figure steps down from the carriage. The woman runs toward her, welcoming her back warmly. Eve smiles, removes her hat, and greets Juno, declaring that she has returned. Far away in the northern lands, Rishitoka stands among the wolfkin, speaking while Karina remains at her side. Rishitoka approaches her and mentions that the prince's wedding to her sister is set to take place next month. If Karina truly intends to distinguish herself, Rishitoka reasons, then targeting that occasion would be most effective. She reassures her that the preparations for revenge are proceeding smoothly and that there is no need for anxiety. Karina responds that she does not feel anxious in the slightest, for she is not alone but together with her. Moved by this, Rishitoka embraces her and declares that once revenge has been achieved, they will formally marry and live happily in the village as husband and wife. Karina pauses briefly before agreeing. She states that she will become a wonderful princess. Chapter 8 opens in the past. A young Eve sits quietly with a book in her hands, absorbed in its pages. The sudden sound of a door opening startles her, and her father calls out to her. He notices that she has slipped into the room again, yet when she turns toward him in apology, he assures her that she need not be sorry, for he is not angry. His gaze falls upon the object she is holding, and he asks whether it is the same one she has been looking at all day, remarking inwardly on how much she seems to love books. The word itself confuses her, prompting him to explain that the object in her hands is called a book. He then asks whether she can read what is written inside. When it becomes clear that she cannot even recognize the letters, she questions what letters and reading mean. Patiently, her father explains that stories are made up of letters. Observing her intense focus upon the page, he chuckles softly and points to a section, indicating that the strange markings she sees are letters. Eve studies them for a long while as her father watches in silence. She admits that she had always thought they were merely drawings. He acknowledges that this assumption is understandable, as letters do resemble drawings to those unfamiliar with their meaning. He explains that humans use letters to form words, and those words are preserved within books. Amazed, Eve asks what a particular set of letters signifies and what word it forms. Her father hesitates, then confesses with a touch of embarrassment that he himself cannot read very well. Though he has long wished to learn and has tried for decades, he still lacks the skill to properly read books. There were limitations in how much he could study back in the village, and, more significantly, the other wolfkin had shown little interest in literacy. He suspects they saw no practical value in it, even if they had possessed the ability to read. Eve lowers her gaze to the book and expresses a quiet wish to understand what the markings mean. Her father tells her that, at the very least, he can read the title aloud, if she will hand him the book. She offers it to him, and after a moment of recollection, he identifies it. The title, he declares, is The Monster Princess. The scene shifts back to the present. Juno's cheerful voice rings out, announcing that the food is ready and that the main dish has been completed. She proudly proclaims it a new recipe, which she has named Juno's Special Welcome Back Eevee Pie. Eve and the children react with wonder and delight. Juno urges everyone to make space at the table, and Eve remarks on how delicious it appears. The moment Juno sets the pie upon the table, one of the children eagerly reaches toward it, only for Juno to sharply call out for them to stop. Spinning around, she calls for Eevee and extends a spoon toward her, declaring that the very first bite belongs to her. Eve hesitates as one of the children exclaims in astonishment at the enormous portion being offered. Another protests that one should never look down on the bite size of a wolfkin. Juno dismisses the notion that it is overly large and urges Eve to open her mouth wide. After a brief pause of contemplation, Eve complies, and Juno feeds her the pie. She watches expectantly, asking whether it tastes good. Eve chews thoughtfully before pronouncing it delicious. Juno erupts into cheers and once more welcomes her home. Eve smiles warmly and affirms that she has returned. The children, growing impatient, complain that there has been enough talk and that they should begin eating already, one of them lamenting that hunger has overtaken them. Eve laughs and concedes that they are right. They all settle around the dining table once more. Juno ensures that everyone is seated properly before encouraging them to begin their meal. As they eat, Eve reflects that this spirited girl is Juno. She lives together with Eve in her home, though it is not the house where Eve herself was born. That place, too, had been an orphanage, and the thought lingers quietly in her mind. Juno suddenly calls her name, and when Eve turns, Juno leans in and licks her cheek. She chuckles, explaining that some food had been stuck there. Flustered, Eve protests that Juno has hands and could have simply wiped it away. Juno laughs freely while the children complain that the food will grow cold. Amid the lively noise, Eve contemplates the nature of her bond with Juno, recognizing that theirs is the kind of relationship that allows for such uninhibited gestures. Later, once dinner has ended, they tuck the children into bed. In the quiet that follows, Juno remarks that it is still quite surprising that Evie returned home so suddenly, as she usually sends word ahead of time. Eve agrees and offers an apology. Juno trails behind her into their shared room and gently inquires whether she needed a respite. Eve gives a non-committal response, but Juno reaches out and grips her shoulder, observing that it is unlike Evie to be troubled by worries. Eve counters that she does, in fact, worry at times. Juno acknowledges this but insists that Evie is always composed and capable of resolving whatever troubles her on her own. For that reason, she finds it unusual that Evie would come home because something is weighing on her mind. Eve tells Juno that she holds her in far too high regard. Juno denies it fervently, clarifying that she simply believes Evie is not truly distressed by whatever the matter may be. Eve remains silent in response to Juno's earlier insistence, and Juno breaks into a soft giggle, remarking that this quiet composure is exactly what she meant. To her, Evie has always been strong and unshakably cool, the same Miss Wolf she has long regarded as her hero. She acknowledges that she may have been somewhat pushy with her questions, yet insists that no explanation is necessary. Simply being able to speak with Evie again after some time apart and seeing her face in person is enough to make her happy. Eve is moved by these words, but a memory suddenly surfaces in her mind. She tightens her grip on Juno's hand and slowly sits upright. Juno notices the change and calls her name in concern. Eve begins cautiously, saying that Juno need not answer if she does not wish to. After hesitating, she continues, asking whether Juno understands what it feels like to be forced into an unwanted engagement. She explains that she has been researching a certain woman. Though her official duties differ somewhat, this particular inquiry has occupied her thoughts. Several years earlier, the woman had entered the royal court as the crown prince's fiancée. Her name was Karina. Before being denounced by the crown prince, she had gained notoriety as a villainess, accused of committing every imaginable evil. When the prince uncovered her alleged crimes, he publicly condemned her and exiled her to the frigid northern borderlands. There, she became ensnared in an avalanche and perished. Some within the royal court even went so far as to claim that such a fate was nothing more than her just deserts. Eve admits that when she first began investigating Karina, she had assumed those rumors were likely true. However, that perception began to unravel when she spoke to someone who had known Karina before she entered the royal court. According to that account, Karina's younger sister had initially been chosen as the crown prince's fiancée, but due to her frail health, Lady Karina had been selected in her place. In those earlier days, Karina had been described as a lady capable of holding her head high wherever she might find herself. Even if she had merely replaced her sister, everyone who knew her at the time had apparently believed she would make a splendid crown princess consort, entirely unlike the malicious figure later depicted in rumor. Eve confesses that she cannot shake the feeling that the stark difference in how people viewed Karina before and after entering the royal court may have stemmed from her engagement to the prince. Juno falls quiet for a moment before asking whether that is why Evie chose to come see her. Eve answers that it seems like a terrible reason. Juno chuckles softly and reminds her that she has said before that Evie needs no reason at all. Eve speaks her name in protest, but Juno asks for a moment to think. She repeats the phrase, an unwanted engagement, thoughtfully. As she gazes out the window, her eyes begin to glisten with moisture. Then she suggests that perhaps the issue was not that the engagement was unwanted, but rather that it had been wanted. Eve echoes the words in confusion, questioning how something being wanted could be the problem. Juno explains that when someone strives to be a good girl, a good child, she longs to meet the expectations placed upon her. She herself had once been like that. And she believes Karina must have been the same. Chapter 9 opens with Juno recounting a story. Once, there lived a very beautiful girl who spent her days surrounded by the love of her family, living in happiness and warmth. Then, without warning, her parents passed away, and the girl was left utterly alone. In her solitude, a kind priest took her in, offering her shelter and guidance. From that moment forward, she was raised with meticulous care as a special child, beloved by God. That girl was Juno, the sacred priestess. Juno remembers that when she was small, the priest would call for her, summoning her to begin the day's lessons. Her biological parents had died suddenly in an epidemic, leaving her with no surviving relatives. The priest, who had known her father, took her into his care. Without fully comprehending the upheaval of her circumstances, she found herself living with him in a small village deep within the forest. One day, the priest told her to listen carefully. He explained that she was a special child, one loved by God. Her lustrous hair and clear blue eyes, he said, were proof of divine blessing. When the proper time arrived as the saintess, she would be expected to share the love she had received from God with the people of the village. On another occasion, Juno remembers discovering a stray kitten and attempting to feed it. The priest came upon her and sharply demanded to know what she believed she was doing. She explained that the kitten was alone and hungry, and she wished to help it. At once, the priest rebuked her, warning her not to approach such impure creatures. Startled by his raised voice, she flinched as the kitten fled. He lamented the state of her soiled hands and declared the situation terrible. After taking a steadying breath, he reminded her that she was a special child. Though it had been only a kitten, one could not know what corruption it might carry. Even if she had pitied it, she should not have acted so recklessly. Juno apologized, and the priest accepted her contrition, saying that understanding her error was what mattered. Together, they would now pray to God for forgiveness, for the Lord was all-seeing. They clasped their hands in reverence as the priest offered a fervent prayer, asking their dear Lord to forgive them and grant salvation and prosperity to his believers, and nothing more. Juno watched him, then lowered her own gaze and began to pray as well. The people of the village believed devoutly in God, and the priest stood among them as one of the most pious. He raised Juno with zealous dedication in a manner he deemed fitting for a child of God, all in preparation for a prosperity rite he claimed to have received through divine revelation. After finishing her prayer that day, young Juno asked her father whether that was all she was meant to be. The seriousness of his gaze caused her to flinch. Rising to his feet, he praised her prayer as wonderful and expressed confidence that the Lord would graciously overlook her mistake. Yet he cautioned her never to grow complacent. As the saintess, her duty would be to share the true Lord's love. She must never open her heart to anything else. He asked if she could promise this. After a moment of thought, she answered that she could. In her heart, Juno longed to be liked by him. Having lost her parents and become an orphan, she clung to the security he provided. She remembered him once telling her that he looked forward to the day she would fulfill her purpose. He had raised her alone despite the village's poverty, and she felt an earnest desire to repay his kindness. She did not wish to be abandoned again. The priest urged her to grow quickly and splendidly, so that one day she might bestow God's love upon them all. Years pass, and the day the priest had long anticipated finally arrives. He congratulates Juno, telling her that the moment has come at last. Soon, the entire village will know salvation, and she has grown splendidly into her role. Juno attempts to speak, but he continues, declaring that everyone has been eagerly awaiting this day. Nothing remains but to carry out the ceremony. He assures her that he believes in her completely and is certain she will succeed. There are preparations he must attend to, and he instructs her to wait where she is for a while. Juno answers obediently and watches as he leaves the room, the door clicking shut behind him. Alone, she wonders whether completing the ceremony will finally make him happy. Her gaze drifts toward the window, where she notices a cat outside. A thought crosses her mind. Could it be the same cat from years ago? She steps outside and marvels at how much it has grown. She wonders if it has come to play. Her smile widens when a small kitten peeks out from behind it, and she lets out a delighted squeal at the sight. Then anxiety seeps in. If her father were to see them, he would surely be displeased. His stern warning echoes in her mind, forbidding her from approaching impure creatures. She tells herself she must send them back into the forest. Gently at first, then more urgently, she shoos the cats away, warning them that it is not safe to remain there and urging them to hurry into the bushes. The cats scatter, but she calls after them that they are going the wrong way. Her heart lurches when a voice suddenly speaks nearby, praising someone for a job well done. Startled, she moves closer to a nearby window. Through it, she hears a man complimenting the result as truly splendid. Realizing the voices are coming from within the house, she recognizes her father's voice along with that of another villager. The priest remarks that light hair and gem-like eyes are exceedingly rare and breathtaking. He confesses that even he had not expected her to grow into such beauty. He expresses pride in her appearance, calling her stunning. Tears gather in Juno's eyes as she listens silently. The other man responds crudely, saying that the children she will bear are certain to fetch a high price. The priest agrees and adds that he hopes the offspring will be even more beautiful than she is. Confusion floods Juno's mind. She hears them speculate about whether the children will inherit her hair, her eyes, her face, or her figure. The priest comments that beautiful hair is always in demand. Even if a child's face were unattractive, fine hair alone would ensure it could be sold. The man suggests that if the infant's eyes are exceptional, it could be sold as a baby, though he expresses indifference about what would become of it afterward. The priest calmly explains that he intends to have her bear a child by a different villager each year. He has already told her that the ceremony is a prosperity rite for the village, and he notes that she has not questioned him. The other man remarks cynically that prosperity will indeed come, praising the priest's skill in finding such girls. He speculates that if she has grown into such a jewel, her mother must have been the same and laments not having taken her mother as well. The priest replies that her mother would have resisted too fiercely had he attempted to take her, and that it was more efficient to kill the parents outright. The man suggests that he likely killed her because she fought back. The priest denies this claim. Overwhelmed, Juno covers her ears and squeezes her eyes shut, the horrifying realization forming that her father may have killed her mother. She retreats swiftly to her room, struggling to compose herself. Moments later, the door opens and the priest calls her. He informs her that it is time for the ceremony. Wordlessly, Juno rises and follows him. As the ceremony begins, Juno suddenly breaks into a run. Behind her, a villager shouts that the saintess has fled, calling for others to stop her and bring her back. Panic surges through her as she rushes forward, crying out desperately for help from anyone who might hear her. Before she can escape, someone intercepts her and seizes her hand. It is the priest. He demands to know whether she intends to break the promise she made to him. She denies it, but he insists that they return at once. She struggles and commands him to release her, while he condemns her as an ungrateful child. In that moment, the memory of her earlier question resurfaces, whether completing the ceremony would finally make him happy. She squeezes her eyes shut and silently pleads for salvation. Suddenly, an unexpected figure intervenes. The priest is struck and knocked to the ground. Juno stumbles back and instinctively retreats behind the newcomer. Eve stands before her, unimpressed by the sight of grown adults ganging up to intimidate a single girl. Juno, tears streaming down her face, can do nothing but stare at her rescuer. Eve turns to her and asks whether she is all right and what has happened. Juno's thoughts race. How can she possibly explain herself to someone she has never met? She manages to say that those people are chasing her. Even as she speaks, she is struck by the strangeness of the situation. This girl has stepped in without knowing any details, offering help without hesitation. Desperation overtakes her, and she begs to be taken away, addressing her savior as Miss Wolf. Eve extends her hand without further question and declares that they should leave at once. She will take her away. Together, they begin to run. As Eve pulls her along, Juno becomes acutely aware of the sensation of their hands meeting for the first time, the warmth of Evie's grasp, steady and reassuring, guiding her away from danger. It is a moment she knows she will never forget for the rest of her life. The scene shifts back to the present. The children protest loudly, clinging to Eve and insisting that she must not leave. Eve gently but firmly tells them that she has to return to work. One child cries that she does not need to go, while another demands that she stop working altogether. Eve scolds them lightly, attempting to calm their outburst. Juno, observing the preparations, notices that Eve appears to have more luggage than when she arrived and asks whether she is taking something additional with her. Eve explains that she is bringing along several books her father left behind. There are surprisingly many volumes that do not exist in the royal library, and she cannot help but wonder where in the world he managed to acquire them. Juno laughs and remarks that they certainly know where Eve inherited her love of books. She then hands her something for the journey. Eve accepts it with gratitude. Juno adds, however, that describing the books as left behind makes it sound as though her father has passed away. Eve replies that she did not know how else to phrase it. According to her parents, they simply departed to search for more books. Juno watches Eve and comments that what she is holding looks delicious. Drawing her attention, she begins to speak thoughtfully. She reflects that even if she had never uncovered the truth back then, she might still have found a kind of happiness. She had believed that if she continued to have faith and fulfilled her role obediently, her father might eventually come to love her. Perhaps, had she remained ignorant, she could have been content in her own way. If she had been able to completely abandon herself to that belief, she might not have been hurt at all. And yet, she does not regret learning the truth. Discovering her father's betrayal, fleeing the village, enduring all that followed, she now sees those events as nothing more than a prelude. Because through them, she met Evie. It was thanks to that encounter on that fateful day that she was able to begin a new life and find a new form of happiness. That is how she chooses to understand her past. Before Eve can respond, one of the children calls out that the cart has arrived. After placing her belongings aboard, Eve apologizes to Juno, saying that everything has been so hectic during her visit that they never truly had the chance to relax. Juno assures her that it does not matter, seeing her again has been more than enough to make her happy. Then, with a small gesture, she asks Eve to come closer. As Eve leans in, Juno presses a kiss to her cheek. She confesses that even though Eve has been physically present the entire time, her thoughts have seemed preoccupied with someone else, and that made her feel a little jealous. She requests that the next time Eve returns home, she come only after finishing all her work. Eve touches her cheek, smiles softly and agrees. As they wave goodbye and the cart begins to depart, Juno reflects inwardly. She realizes she never completely believed in her father's teachings. Although she acted in ways she hoped would earn his approval, deep down she always wished that someone she had never met would one day appear and take her away from that village. Even while claiming to feel indebted to the priest and the villagers, she had, in truth, already given up. Closing her eyes, she offers a silent prayer that Miss Karina might also find happiness, just as she herself did upon meeting Evie. Elsewhere in the city, a poster bearing the image of a wanted witch is displayed, only to be seized by someone's hand.